So good evening. We have met for a section of audits and assurance. And since today is the first day of our meeting, I would like to first of all talk about how to pass the paper. I really look at this side to be very important area. This side is very an important area. Why? Because any paper you are thinking of writing, it is important that first of all you sit down to ask yourself, how do I pass this paper? Very, very important. It is important to ask yourself how to pass the paper. So if we're able to determine that, I think that it will help you with your approach to working hard and also getting the pass. So let me just go through that. How to pass the audit paper. How to pass the audit paper. That's okay. So we look at the first item, right? So in passing the audit paper, we need to master the key areas. So master the key areas of the paper. So mastering the key areas of the paper, an individual will ask, so what are the key areas of the paper? We have one, audit risks. Audit risks. It can never happen that you go to write an exam in the case of audit and assurance to say that you don't get a question under audit risks. It will never happen. So it is an area which is very key. The next one is internal controls. Internal controls. Knowing the COSO framework, which has the 5 elements, and also being able to identify internal control deficiencies and giving responses to the deficiencies is what we are talking about over here. Then we come to the C aspects, substantive procedures. Substantive procedures. Substantive procedures. Substantive procedures. Now over here, we are supposed to base on test of control, test of controls, test of controls. Let me just look at also audit procedures and audit evidence. Audit procedures and audit evidence. Right. So we come to the D aspects. Come to the D aspects. I would advise that probably if you can mute your speaker, it will really help. If you can mute your speaker, if you can mute your speaker to really help, so at least we can make a move. That is excellent. Thank you very much for doing that. So D, we are looking at audit review. So audit review and finalization. Audit review and finalization. Audit review and finalization. So over here, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about reporting aspects of the audit. We're going to look at the reporting aspects of the audit. Then second, mastering areas is the first item to do if you only want to pass this paper. The second item is to master audit standards. Master audit standards. That is the next thing to look at. We are to master audit standards. We have a lot of standards that we are going to meet. We can talk about ISA 220, you can talk about ISA 250, that sort of, can talk about a lot of them, right? So we need to look at how best we can really understand the audit standards, because If you are looking at the audits, it is the standards you're going to apply. And if you do not master the standards, you tend out to be affected when it comes to auditing, right? So these are the two areas you're supposed to look at. Then the last item is to start solving past questions, right? Past questions early. That is it. Do not say that you have not finished with the entire textbook, so you are not going to start solving the questions. The first thing to do is to just look at a topic, you go through the topic quickly, thereafter you zoom into solving questions. Passing audit needs what? A quick start of solving questions. So these are the areas, and I recommend that at least go through the past questions. Go to the past questions twice. That is it. Somebody might think that this is a complicated job to do, but I tell you, this has been proven and has been tested that students who tend to look at these steps, right? Any sort of group I tend to meet, these are the sort of issues that I tend to still give them. In the case of last setting, we happen to get 8 students booking for this paper, and I tell you, the pass was just 100%. The 8 students all passed the paper. Because how can it happen that we have taken you through all these areas of the textbook, giving you the guidelines, how to write answers, solving past questions with you, giving you guide on top, giving you exam tips. You decided to also add up by helping to solving the past questions twice. You see, you didn't get a pass, it doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen, and it will not happen. So the last item is to pay respect to our exam steps. Pay respect to our exam steps. Pay respect to our exam tips. Pay respect to our exam tips. And our exam tips do not fail. When we tell you an area is coming up, you have to treat it with respect. If you tend to underestimate it, you go there, you open up, you realize that that question has featured. So I think that one of the hallmark at the moment is able to determine which area could be examined. Now, it does not necessarily mean that we are not going to go through the entire textbook. We're going to go through that entirely. But what we have to note is that after going through all aspects of the textbook, going through all the topics, teaching you from start to finish, revising with you, taking you through mentoring section, it is important for you to know for sure that the examiner is not going to examine 100% of the textbook. He's not going to do that. So we are not going to ask you to think through what areas is going to be examined. Instead, we are going to do that work for you. And we are not going to also state that, oh, do this, do that. You go there, nothing pops out. Never. It doesn't happen like that. And for about 5 years, nothing of that sort has transpired. And in your sitting, it's not going to change because audit continues to be what? Audit, right? So these are the four key elements that has to be done to get a pass. So I would advise that you really pay heed to that. How to pass the audit paper, very important. Any paper you tend to think of going to write it, the first thing to do is to ask yourself, how do I pass this paper? But a lot of students do not do that. And another thing is that a lot of students do not give the audit paper respect. So let me move to the second section by talking about the pitfalls. Audits and assurance, or let me just say students' pitfalls. That is such certain mistakes that students tend to commit when it comes to audit and assurance. Certain mistakes that students tend to commit when it comes to audit and assurance. So one, thinking that the audit and assurance paper is a reading paper. That is the first pitfall. A lot of students tend to think that the audit and assurance paper is basically reading. Some even tends to lie in their bed, pick up the book, then they read just like that, just like a normal newspaper. But one thing we will notice that the audit and assurance paper is a practical paper. And it is also a specialized paper that we are not going to make anybody pass it whilst the person is not prepared. Because you are going to go out there to issue audit reports. And if you tend to do things in a haphazard manner, you are going to be held liable. They are one of the issues that we look at, which is called what? Auditor's liability. Auditor's liability. If you are an auditor and you tend to do your work in a haphazard manner, you are going to be held liable and answerable for your work because you're a professional and there is not supposed to be negligence on your part. There's not supposed to be negligence on your part because your clients are going to base on your audit report in making decisions. Investors are going to base on your audit report in making their decisions. So if you are going to give a disclaimer to an audit report, whereas that audit report, the opinion to be issued is supposed to be a free and fair. That is in a true perspective. Or to just say, issuing a clean opinion. Then you have issued a disclaimer. What do you think investors are going to do? Because of your work, investors are not going to bring their money to invest in that company. So you should know for sure that you are not supposed to be negligent. In your capacity, you are acting just like a doctor performing an operation in a theater. You cannot be negligent, causing the death of a person. They now come back to say we are to forgive you. That is going to be huge. So auditors need to be very careful and they are supposed to be meticulous with whatever they tend to do. So one of the pitfalls to failing of the audit on the part of students, one is thinking that the audit and assurance paper is a reading paper. They do not think that is practical. So that is the first pitfall. The second pitfall is lack of mastery. Lack of mastery of exam tips. Very important. If the exam tips comes up, you need to really master it. You need to really train yourself to that. Do not think that is just the normal sort of what exam tips given to you, right? So one of the pitfalls to students not passing is some of them do not even get the exam tips because the provider or the tutor that they are actually with do not have the in and out, the skills, the competencies in identifying clearly that this area is going to be featured. This area is going to be examined. So one of the pitfalls is that. Another perspective is that the student might be with the provider, very sharp, smart in that regard, is able to let students know the areas that is going to come up as exam tips. But still, a lot of students do not pay respect to that. They go there, it is examined, they find themselves wanting. Right. So we move on to the third pitfall. The third pitfall, not mastering how to write audit and assurance answers. Not mastering, sorry, not mastering, not mastering, not mastering how to write let me proceed. Sorry for the interruption. Not mastering how to write audit and assurance answers. Not mastering how to write audit and assurance answers. Not mastering how to write. So a lot of students do not master how to write the answers. And this is the side which gives the examiners, we the examiners, the opportunity to mark the students down as early as possible. For example, every point on the audit and assurance paper, I mean your answers, should have the point and it should have an explanation. Should have the point and it should have an explanation. So if a student should write an answer, where the point exists and there's no explanation, that student is called zero. Even in the case of writing audit procedures, we should see you talk about the procedure you want to perform and why you want to perform that procedure. If you should just state that, check bank reconciliation, and you are not telling us why you want to check the bank reconciliation, we score you zero. Because we really need you to be a master of the subject. So you cannot just write an audit procedure, check bank reconciliation. What is the purpose of doing that? So every point on the audit and assurance paper should have the action and should have the reason for the action. The reason for the action bit contribute to the explanation of the action. So in all, every answer to be written by the student on the exams paper, in the case of audit and assurance, should have explanation. We do not need you to explain too much in detail. We want you to give us brief explanation to every point you put on the paper. That is it. So come to the last item. Poor allocation of time. Here, probably I do not know if it is coming from the point of students not joining good tutors. In a normal sense, if we're using, let's say, 3 months of to study this paper, what do you have to do? You have to start early. And you are not supposed to keep so much time in the textbook phase. The textbook phase, you are supposed to go through as quickly as possible. You're not supposed to spend a lot of time. Some students tend to join providers who are going to, if it's 3 months, they're going to use, say, 2.5 months to go through the textbook. And the last 15 days, they're going to use it for revision. Some even call it intervention. And they will be intervening something for just 3 days. I do not know what they actually do at that point. They call it intervention, 3 days. I do not know what they are intervening. You need to start early, finish or complete the textbook. Then still have more time to practice solving questions. Students will write the answers, will submit to you as the tutor, you mark it, you give your recommendation, they tend to learn or improve on that because you are an examiner. Unless otherwise you have joined a provider or a tutor who isn't an examiner, then you will not get that benefit. But if you should join an examiner, he is going to give you questions, and after you sending your solution, he's going to mark you just like the normal exam perspective. So your performance will show what will happen on the day of exam. It cannot happen that he will score you low, then you pass the exams. It will never happen. Unless otherwise he's not an examiner. But if he is, it will whatever be the case reflect. Right. So this is one of the issues which turns out to be a pitfall to a lot of students failing the audit and assurance paper. Sometimes they tend to underestimate the paper, just like point 1. They tend to underestimate the paper. Oh, this is reading. So far as I get the textbook, I can do self-study. If I get a textbook, I can do self-study. Do not make a mistake. And it is good for you to join a provider. Do not only think that you are going through this paper on the basis of only passing the paper. But wherever you tend to find yourself, whatever you learned is what you're going to use it throughout your life. So if you go through self-study, and by so doing, God helps you to get 50%. Though you have passed the paper by getting 50%, but when you meet your peers in the case of discussions of audit, you find yourself wanting because you actually got a Jesus pass. And you didn't really train yourself in the case of what audit. If we are talking about a matter which relates to an audit standard, you find yourself wanting because you actually didn't learn well, but just that you got a 50%. So I would advise that students are not supposed to only look at the point of passing, but to appreciate the people. Think through if you turn out to be an auditor, right? All your weaknesses will be shown because at the learning stage, you didn't pay heed to what the issues that you were learning. You were only focusing on getting your 50%. Getting your 50%. So first phase of our meeting for today has been dealt with. What was that? That relates to how to pass the audit paper. The first phase is how to pass the audit paper. Second phase was looking at students' pitfalls. Students' pitfalls. That was the second phase. We are now going to move to the third phase. We're now going to move to the third phase. So the first phase was how to pass the audit paper. Second phase was students' pitfalls. Very important. Any paper you tend to think of writing it, please sit down. Do this analysis. Do this analysis. We have gotten a lot of students who have passed through our hands in the case of this paper. And a lot of them will testify. If you tend to meet an individual who teaches audit and also practice audit, they actually help you to cement your understanding in the case of audits. So what I'm going to do is that one of the areas I'm going to do is to show you how to create working papers. Such that after our study, wherever you find yourself as an auditor, you will not find yourself wanting. A lot of students tend to learn auditing. If you ask them to audit, let's say, revenue, they can't audit revenue. If they tend to get an SME, a small, medium size company to audit, where the SME would want them to audit revenue, they do not know how to start. They do not know how to end. Probably it might not be their fault. It might be that probably they join a very weak provider, or they actually concluded that they want to save their cost by doing a self-study. So if you are doing a self-study, you have never been an auditor. So if you have never been an auditor, how do you even understand the practicalities of the paper? You are only going to learn in a haphazard manner, praying that you get your 50% and you go away. So please and please again, do not let the passing only be an important thing to you. It is important. Passing is important, absolutely. But let's know for sure that this is what we are going to do in our entire sense. So if that is what you're going to concentrate on, this is what you're going to live with, then why do you have to underestimate it? So first item was how to pass the paper, whatever paper you are writing, be it financial management, be it whatever paper that you are writing, tax, whatever, right? Financial reporting, you need to pay attention. Ask yourself, sit down, ask yourself the question, how do I pass this tax paper? How do I pass this financial management paper? Though we have a lot of issues which tends to come up in the case of passing every paper. That is why it is important for you to get somebody who is experienced to walk you through. Something that you can worry yourself over and over again, thinking through how to get it done. The experienced individual will bring it up quickly, you get it, and make a move, right? So the third phase of our meeting today is to go through the syllables. These are the sort of issues that we are going to talk about as we tend to go through the textbook phase. There's already notes in that regard to support you. So thereafter, I'll just pick up your emails, then share with you documents via Google Drive, right? So you're still with Harry? You can call me or WhatsApp me by 0243 583352. Right. It's very important you do that. And the sort of issue we tend to incorporate is that so far as the student has hooked up with us, anytime the student is solving a question, the student is having a challenge, that individual can fall on us. So the individual can ask every question that is worrying or actually what's disturbing him or her, right? So these are all the sort of benefits that the student tends to get, right? Right, that's okay. So we are looking at the audit and assurance paper, audit and assurance paper. Part A, let's look at it. I've categorized them into parts, right? I've categorized the section into parts. Let me share the screen again. I've categorized the section into parts. Right. So the first part, sorry, there's a mistake, right? The first part is audit framework and regulation. Audit framework and regulation. Audit framework and regulation. That is the first part. Audit framework and regulation. So part A, audit framework and regulation. Audit framework and regulation. So we are going to look at audits and other assurance engagement. So you know for sure that when you talk about audits, we are talking about work on the financial statement. If it is not audits, then that is not about financial statement. So audit, anytime you talk about audit, we are talking about financial statement. But any work which is not about the financial statement is called non-audit assignment. And that is what we also call other assurance engagement. So we have two types of work that auditors tends to perform. It's either an audit work or a non-audit work. If it's an audit work, you're talking about something on the financial statement. If it's a non-audit work, it is not about the financial statement. It can be something which leads to the financial statement, but not to the financial statement. We move on to the second, statutory audit and regulation. So we need to give the distinction between a statutory audit and look at all issues pertaining to what the regulation, the laws of the land. Corporate governance, a system in which a company is directed and controlled. We need to also learn corporate governance. We need to learn corporate governance. Corporate means company, how a company is governed, right? So here we talk about a lot of issues, information asymmetry. Look at the instance that the one who turns out to be the chief executive officer should not be the same person who is the board chairman. Those sort of issues, right? We tend to walk you through for you to get a good grasp of that. Then we come to the next item, which we call the professional ethics and quality control procedures. So over here, we're going to look at ethics. Over here, we're going to look at ethics and professional issues. So over here, we're going to look at ethical issues. Students are to note that ethical issues are different from professional issues. If we ask you to write a professional issue and you give us an ethical issue, we score you 0 for that. So ethical issues, different from what? Professional issues. So let me just say ethical issues and professional issues. These are not the same. So that's why you see the audit is full of technicalities. You should know what the examiner needs. You should actually know what he wants you to talk about. It is not like any other paper where we ask you a question and you can just give any answer that you think. When we ask you a question, we know what you are supposed to write. And if you're not writing in that line, we score you 0, as simple as ABC. This is audits. Right, so we move on to the next item, internal audits. We look at internal audit function. Every robust organization which tends out to focus on internal controls tends to have a very robust corporate governance principles, and that robust corporate governance principles leads to the establishment of an internal audit department. So we look at internal audit, and that will bring us to the end of part A of the syllabus. Audits, framework, and regulation. We move on to the next Parts, I've categorized them into parts, right? Right? I have just categorized them into parts that suit me, right? So we come to part B. Part B, that is planning and risk assessment. So we tend to learn that risk assessment starts at the audit planning stage. And we continue to assess risks throughout the audit phase. Right. So here we're going to talk about planning. And over here, the first item to look at is risk assessment. We are going to focus on one key audit standard called ISA 315. ISA, what is the meaning of the full meaning of ISA, right? What is the full meaning of ISA? International Standard on Auditing. International Standard on Auditing. International Standards on Auditing. International Standards on Auditing, ISA. So we have ISA, right? Some students call it ISA. However you pronounce it, right? It's okay. ISA 315, right? Good. Talks about risk assessment. So here you're going to understand the client, right? And the understanding of the client is going to help us assess the risks of material misstatement. Right? Good. So risk assessment, we're going to look at the main basis, audit risks. So over here, that is where you're going to look at all risk assessment. We're going to talk about audit risks. Audit risks. I give it the mnemonic CID, audit risks. I give it the mnemonic CID, control risks, inherent risks, detection risks. Then move on to audit planning and documentation. So you look at the need for documentations and how should the audit items, in fact, that is working papers and other supporting documentation like reconciliations and other bit, how are they supposed to be documented? You see, that is why I'm saying that it is good for you to get the practical aspect of what you are learning. So here, I tend to create working papers for you to see how working papers actually exist. Some individuals have never even seen working papers before. Right, you get to the next item, introduction of audit evidence. Introduction of audit evidence. Here we are going to explain the difference between audit procedures and audit evidence. Right, we're going to explain the difference between audit procedures and audit evidence. Now, these are one of the things, that's why I see that students are supposed to join good tutors. A lot of students do not know this. Anytime we talk about audit evidence, right? Audit evidence. In writing answers for audit evidence, we need to start with what? A noun. How would a student know this bit? And that is what we examiners are looking at. If you do not do that, we score you 0. You have to what? Really know this bit. If you don't know it, there's no excuse. Audit procedures. Because an evidence is a subject and the subject is a noun. Somebody might have, let's say, video coverage of whatever somebody did. That is a substance, and that substance is a noun. So an audit evidence is a noun. A reconciliation can be an evidence. A bank statement is an evidence. So when you talk about an evidence, it's a noun, and a noun is a subject. Be it a subject or an object, it's an item which can be what? We can actually say that it's a substance. But when you talk about audit procedure answers, right? Audit procedures, when the examiner asks you to write audit procedures answers, we start with a verb because a procedure is an action. So if we are asking you to talk about audit procedure and you write audit evidence answer, we score you 0 because you have deviated. We have not asked you to give us audit procedure answer. We are asking you to give us audit evidence answer, and you are writing audit procedure answer. You have not met the requirement, we give you 0. It's close. So we have a lot of tricks that we are going to learn. And you are not just learning. Do not just say you are learning. You are to know what the examiner needs. So a lot of students who tend to fail the paper do not think like the examiner. You should know what the examiner knows. Now, one thing is that we, the examiners, know what you do not know. And areas that you do not know, that is where we're going to bring questions on that. In fact, that is the evil side of examiners. To make it what? A professional exams. If it is our interest to just make you prepare yourself in a mushroom form, right? You are not strong. are not treating or actually working to be iron in terms of audit, but you are just working through to just go your way through, then there wouldn't be the need for us to say that we really want to test you on the fundamental areas of the paper, which will make you really a good auditor. We'll just give you all questions on ethics, right? We just bring all questions on ethics, then you write it, then you pass. But we are not looking at that. Good. Every individual who calls himself an auditor should be able to think through audit evidences. So if it happens that you are auditing an SME and there's an expenses, right? There's a new expenses incurred by that SME. Are you not going to sit down to think of how to come out with an audit procedure in auditing that expenses? Or you're now going to pick up a book to look at whatever it turns out to be? Now note that all situations are not the same. So those sort of generic procedures we tend to give it to you in your textbook does not fit every item. So you need to be really practical. You need to train your mind to be practical when you are learning the audit paper. And you are supposed to also join a provider who will not make the teaching of the audit paper theoretical, but make it practical for you to really appreciate what is actually going on. Right? For instance, when you talk about actions in ethics, the examiner is actually asking you to write something. In the case of reporting, when the examiner states that what action should the auditor take? In fact, that action word and the reporting questions is different from, in fact, the answers to write. You can have a question, what action should the auditor take if it is an ethical question? And a reporting, you can also get another question. What action should the auditor take if it's a reporting question? Are you going to write the same answers? You should know what the examiner needs. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. So when you talk about action at every context, that word action represents something. And we actually expect you to write something that is also in our heads as examiners. If you tend to write anything based on what you think as action, you score you 0. Part C, internal control. So over here, we're going to focus much about the COSO framework. We're going to talk much about the COSO framework. If you really want your internal control system to be robust and defensive, you need to pay heed to the COSO framework, right? Test of controls, you look at it. So that ends it for part C. Thereafter, we come to part D, audit evidence. Audit evidence, audit evidence. Beautiful area that we want to talk about. This is where we are going to talk about accounting standards. Somebody will say that this is an audit paper. So why are we talking about what accounting standards? You cannot audit a client without an application of accounting standards. So first of all, we look at audit procedures and you see, the first point, what did we look at? We looked at what? Audit evidence, right? Introduction. Let me highlight that. Introduction to audit evidence. And audit evidence is different from audit procedures. So what can you see here? Here we are talking about audit procedures. So the examiner asks you to write audit procedures answers, and you are writing audit evidence answers, just like this topic. You score 0 for that. And we also talk about sampling. We also talk about sampling. So here we look at the sampling techniques. Look at the sampling techniques. So in gathering evidences, in coming out with procedures, right? In coming out with procedures, in coming out with audit evidences, we need also application of accounting standards. Because what are you auditing? When you say audit, you are auditing the financial statement. And every item on the financial statement is backed by an accounting standard. So how can you say you are auditing the financial statement whilst you do not know accounting standards? Then what are you auditing? So we need to also learn what accounting standards. So whoever is taking the audit paper, mostly it is good for you to take audits with financial reporting. So that when you learn the standards in financial reporting, the same standards you learn in financial reporting, you apply in audit. But sometimes the selection of papers do not actually make it possible, right? Good. So it's normal. But what you tend to do if you are not looking at this combination is to still revise the accounting standards. So the first item is non-current assets. non-current assets. And we are going to look at the beautiful standard, that is IAS 16. We're going to look at IAS 16, right? Tangible non-current assets, property, plant, and equipment. We're going to look at the in and out of this bill. Then we also talk about, so IAS is International Accounting Standards, right? The word IAS is International Accounting Standards. National Accounting Standards. National Accounting Standards. That is IAS. It's different from ISA, right? It's different from International Standards on Auditing. Please do not get it too confusing, right? We have, that is what I've highlighted now. We have International Standards on Auditing, and we have International Accounting Standards, right? That is issued by the IASB, International Accounting Standard Board. That is okay. So we have ISA, International Standards on Auditing, and we have IAS, International Accounting Standards. That is okay. Thereafter, we come to inventory. Inventory. IAS 2 talks about inventory. Then you come to receivables. Now, receivables is absolutely treated just like financial assets. So we still look at the debit and credit in the case of receivables, right? Cash and bank, we can look at cash and bank. Cash and bank is a form of current asset. So this receivables is a current asset. It's a current asset. We look at it. Cash and bank, also a current asset. Right? They look at liabilities. We have a lot of liabilities. So we look at liabilities, look at capital and directors and emoluments, wages. So we look at a section called audit of wages. Audit of wages. So if you have been hired by an SME in your neighborhood, right? Somebody knows for sure that probably you are still in the university and you are learning accounting. Probably you have learned what audits, or you have completed from the university, knowing for sure that you have learned audit. Then we ask you, please, I would want you to audit wages of my employees so that I pay you 1,000 Ghana cedi. You do not know where to start. You do not know where to end. That means you didn't learn well. So that is why I'm saying that the audit paper is not theory, as some people tend to think it is. You need to make it practical so that you have the skills wherever you tend to find yourself, you become what? Impactful, right? So we move on to the next item, not for profit organizations. So over here, we still talk about the 3 E's, economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, right? Non for profit organizations are audited in a slight different way from that of what profit-making organizations. So we talk about those in and out issues pertaining to what non-for-profit organizations like charitable organizations. Then we come to the last aspects of the textbook, that is part E. Part E talks about review and reporting. Review and reporting. So over here we talk about issues pertaining to audit, review, and finalization. We talk about this review and finalization. We talk about reporting, opinions, ISA 700. We talk about those nitty-gritties, right? Now, we will place much attention on accounting standards, audit standards, and learn them concurrently. Basically, that is what we are going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I will bring our meeting for today to an end at this point in time. But one of the things that I'm telling you is that you are not supposed to think that the paper is theoretical. Look at the practical aspect of it, because that is what is going to help you with your experience. As indicated earlier, you can WhatsApp or call me via 02435833352, right? Henry turns out to be an auditor, working as an auditor, and has also been in the teaching industry for long, right? If you get to campuses like University of Professional Studies Accra, you talk about Henry, a lot of students will identify the person that you are talking about. Also, in the case of Legon, mostly floated around Legon, a lot of instances when it comes to issues of discussion on accounting bit, ICG, ACCA bit, CIMA bit, that sort of discussions tends to go on. It's just of late that I do not mostly come to the campuses, but it is still going to work out. We start coming there to speak to students, to let students know the need sometimes to even combine the professional qualification with the learning of the degree, because it turns out to help them, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I bring my meeting to an end. Today, we decided to use today to look at the overview of the audits and assurance paper. Thank you very much for joining and have a very good evening. It's still your tutor, Breman Henry, and you can email me by bremanhenry1@gmail.com. Have a very good evening. And the schedule and other documentation will be shared with you via Google Drive after this meeting. Have a very good evening. Bye-bye.